Another reason why it makes a lot of sense not to go to war. We just don't have the ammunition, the missiles, the rockets. This is nothing new. The Chinese have been stealing everything for centuries. That's why they end up being thrown out of everybody's country across Asia every so many years.
I guess you haven't really heard much about tanks, since then, and except for, I guess, now that we're back to Ukraine, where there seems to be a resurgence, and they're sending American tanks, whether it's surplus or perhaps some of the stuff that's more obsolete, over there. But you're watching these things. A tank goes in and a missile takes it out from 5 miles away, and it seems like it's a very different game with the advent of a lot of technology. I don't know that I'd want to be in a tank right now. It seems it's a very secure place when someone's got a rifle, not so much when they have Hellfire missiles.
Well, actually, when you're walking around on the ground with a weapon, everything can kill you. You have no protection at all. So you're better off in an armored fighting vehicle in 90% of the cases. The problem is that if you go out there without effective air and missile defense, you're done.
Yeah.
You've got to be able to counter the enemy's air and missiles. We have lots of systems, but our army has neglected this for decades. Simply because since World War II and even during the Second World War, we didn't need much air defense. Remember that when we fought the Germans in Western Europe, their air force was largely stripped away or defending cities against bombing attacks. So we were usually dealing with, 1 or 2 airplanes, and we had 5,000 over us protecting us. Well, that's all changed now. But there are lots of systems that can annihilate these small drones. You can shoot down cruise missiles. What you cannot shoot down are hypersonic missiles. But hypersonic missiles are not meant for troops in the field. They're meant for headquarters, command and control, bunkers, ships at sea, large capital ships, aircraft carriers, this sort of thing. But we have to rethink how we organize. And it's a question of, do you need tanks? Of course you do. How many do you need versus other things? And what kind of air and missile defense do you have with you? The Ukrainians are in a lot of trouble right now because the Russians have spent months annihilating all of the air defenses that they have. Because the Russians learned from the Second World War, once the air defense is gone, you can operate as you wish and annihilate everything. And that's where the Russians are headed now. Ukrainians have almost no air defense left. And we, by the way, have almost nothing we can afford to ship them unless we're willing to operate without any air defense ourselves. We don't have the war stocks anymore. We've given it all up. All the artillery ammunition, missiles, and so forth. It'll take years to replenish the arsenals in the United States and elsewhere across Europe. Again, another reason why it makes a lot of sense not to go to war. We just don't have the ammunition, the missiles, the rockets. We don't even have the right structure and organization for it. So back to your first point, you got to get rid of those 44 4-stars. Then you need a new structure where you take it down to about 10 4-stars. And you simplify your structure. We've got too many headquarters with too many focuses and too many interests. And in the meantime, you take 30 or 40,000 U.S. combat troops and you put them on the Mexican border immediately and stop it.
Mm-hmm. You'd mentioned hypersonic missiles, and I couldn't help but remember around the time that we have the botched Afghan withdrawal and Milley is saying he wants to learn about, white rage. China was in the process of, literally, I guess, testing nuclear-capable hypersonic missiles. Let's talk about that, the threat of China, the growing concern about Taiwan, and what an invasion by China could look like. I mean, I think based on the incompetence that we're displaying on a national stage, there was probably always a timeline that China was going to do this, but it feels like whatever that timeline is, it has been greatly accelerated. What are the national security interests in Taiwan? What does that look like as far as military readiness is concerned, et cetera?
Well, remember that all of your intercontinental ballistic missiles that fly at a rate of 40,000 feet per second, they are all hypersonic. So we have hypersonic missiles. They're intercontinental ballistic missiles. The hypersonic missiles we're focused on at the moment are designed for shorter ranges on a regional basis to be largely conventional. Can they be nuclear? Of course. But the nuclear option is not the first option for the Russians and the Chinese. Both have made that very clear. China embraced a no first use doctrine decades ago. Now, as far as their arsenal is concerned, you're right. Over the last 10 years, it's been rather modest. They've only maintained what they thought they needed, which was, by our standards, maybe a few hundred warheads to protect themselves against a nuclear attack. They're now doubling that overnight. They're building far more missiles. But the Chinese have been far more afraid of us and afraid of our attacks than anything else. And there's no interest in China in conquering Taiwan. The timeline for reunification, according to Xi, who is the current emperor of China, we need to stop thinking about communism and now start thinking about the Chinese as an imperial state as it once was for thousands of years, because that's what it is. Xi has said 2044, 2045, 2046 was the target date. And the thing that we don't understand in this country is that Taiwan and China are very similar in the sense that both peoples in both places want the same thing. They all want to live in a society that looks a lot like Singapore. None of them are interested in liberal democracy. They're all interested in prosperity, making money, having the freedom to make money, having the freedom on a personal level to live as they have lived for hundreds and thousands of years. They're not interested in a society like ours. In fact, the Chinese look at our society and can't even begin to imagine how we live in it. Because if you think the kind of criminality we tolerate would be tolerated in those countries, you're very much mistaken. Give you a quick example. The Chinese military is really largely defensive in its orientation. There are no Chinese armies massing to prepare to march into Southeast Asia. In fact, they met with the Vietnamese, and the Vietnamese and the Chinese have reassured each other there will be no war between them. And we have been trying to goad the Vietnamese into a relationship with us, thinking that somehow or another we can leverage them against the Chinese. You have a similar phenomenon on the Korean Peninsula. South Koreans aren't interested in going to war with China. China is their biggest trading partner. And then there's Japan, very similar. The Japanese now have with China something they have not had ever in their history. They have what we would call a free trade arrangement. They have access to Chinese markets. One of the reasons the Japanese and the Chinese fought with each other is that the Chinese emperors always insisted that you pay tribute to China. It was kind of a tax that allowed you access to the market, but you had to pay tribute. Japanese don't pay tribute to anybody. And so the Japanese went to war. Well, that's over. The Japanese have factories in China. The Japanese can send their agricultural products to China. They may have disputes, but no one is going to go to war with them. No one in Asia is talking about a war except us.
So you wrote
and if you think you can fight a war with China with the United States Navy, you're insane. All those surface ships, if they come within 200 nautical miles of China, they'll be targeted and sunk. There's no future for that. And we don't need to do it. Everything has changed. Submarines, unmanned submersibles, space-based intelligence, reconnaissance, surveillance platforms. Those are the things that dominate warfare. Large surface fleets are a thing of the past, which I think is part of the reason the Navy is so anxious to paint China as this great enemy on the scale of Imperial Japan. But we're not going to fight that way in the future. And China is not interested in a war with us.
So
now,
you wrote
does
a
that
book
mean
a few
Chinese
years ago.
are friends of ours? Of course not. I mean, we're the ones with the open borders. Why is the fentanyl coming into the United States? Because our borders are open. Why are the Chinese stealing from us our IP? Because we let them in. I go to business in Northeast Asia. The Koreans and Japanese look at me and say, what are you, stupid? You see any Chinese in our universities, our laboratories? This is nothing new. The Chinese have been stealing everything for centuries. That's why they end up being thrown out of everybody's country across Asia every so many years. I mean, the point is, protect the United States. That's number one. And much of the difficulty we have with China will go away.